Hey everyone. So, the prophet Isaiah starts chapter 2 with this absolutely beautiful vision of future peace. But then, he just slams on the brakes and makes this really dramatic turn. Today, we're going to dive deep into that powerful warning, looking specifically at Isaiah chapter 2, verses 6 through 16.
So you gotta ask, right? Why the sudden shift? I mean, how do you go from talking about swords being turned into farming tools to this stark prophecy of judgment? Well, it turns out this pivot isn't random at all. It's a direct and frankly necessary response to the spiritual state of the nation.
And the prophecy kicks off with one of the most chilling lines you can find in Scripture. This isn't just Isaiah warning them about the future. He's telling them a verdict has already been reached. The Lord has made his decision.
Now, the very first thing to get in verse 6 is just how big this statement is. When it says the house of Jacob, that means everyone. We're talking both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. So this isn't some small, localized issue. The Lord has turned away from the entire family, all because of their wickedness.
This is a pretty heavy statement, isn't it? To be forsaken by God? So the next logical question has to be, why? I mean, what could they have possibly done to deserve that? Well, Isaiah doesn't leave us guessing. He lays out a very detailed list of charges.
And this is where we get to the heart of the problem. Isaiah basically gives us a catalog of their sins, showing that the nation's spiritual and moral rot wasn't just on the surface, it was systemic. It had infected every single part of their society. In verse 6, he lists three huge sins right off the bat. First, he says they were replenished from the east, which means they filled their country with foreign idols and practices from places like Arabia and Chaldea. Second, they got deep into the occult, becoming soothsayers like the Philistines. And third, they started making forbidden alliances with foreigners, which was a direct violation of the law of Moses.
Okay, so let's be clear about what soothsayers means. This wasn't just a little fortune-telling on the side. We're talking about serious occult practices like trying to divine the future from clouds or even attempting to summon storms. See, during the reign of King Uzziah, Judah's army was winning, and they came into close contact with the Philistines. And instead of staying separate, they started picking up these forbidden spiritual habits.
Now, to really understand how bad this was, you have to remember that centuries before Isaiah, the law of Moses set out really clear rules for Israel's kings. You can find it in Deuteronomy. And the whole point was to stop them from trusting in their own military power or their own wealth instead of trusting in God. This ancient law is the very standard they're about to be judged against.
And when you look at verse 7, the contrast is just wow. God commanded, "Don't multiply horses," but their land was full of them. He said, "Don't pile up wealth," and yet there was no end to their treasures. This wasn't just a booming economy. This was a full-blown national arms race fueled by pride. And, as always, it created this massive gap between the rich and the poor. It's a timeless story, really, where people stop trusting in God and start trusting in what they can see, their military and their money.
And here's the real kicker. This corruption wasn't just a problem for the rich and powerful. Verses 8 and 9 make it crystal clear. The land was full of idols. Everybody, from the mean man, the average person, to the great man, the leader, everyone was bowing down to things they had made with their own hands. The sin was everywhere, which is why the judgment is so absolute. Therefore, forgive them not.
So after Isaiah diagnoses the disease, pride, idolatry, materialism, he then reveals the consequence, and he introduces this major concept that you see all over the prophets, the day of the Lord.
Now, when we hear a phrase like that, our minds usually jump straight to the end of the world, right? Fire and brimstone, the whole shebang. But is that what Isaiah is actually talking about here? Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that.
In the Old Testament, the day of the Lord often means a specific historical moment of divine judgment. You could think of it like a divine intervention, a moment when God steps in to weed out wickedness. For Israel, these days came in the form of invasions by Assyria, by Babylon, and much later by Rome. They were these intense, real-world periods of correction. So what's the whole point of this day of judgment? Well, verse 11 sums it up perfectly. It is all about one thing, the complete and total humbling of human pride. Every single thing that makes humanity arrogant will be brought low so that God and God alone is seen as supreme.
And to really hammer this point home, Isaiah starts using this series of powerful poetic symbols. He goes down a list one by one of every single thing that the people of Judah were trusting in for their security instead of trusting in God. He starts in verses 13 and 14 with symbols of natural strength.
You've got the tall, mighty cedars of Lebanon, which were a symbol for the nation's princes and nobles. Then the strong oaks of Bashan, representing the proud people themselves. And finally, the high mountains and hills, which were their natural fortresses and places to hide. God's judgment, he says, is going to level them all.
Next, in verse 15, he moves on to man-made power. Every high tower and every fenced wall obviously point to their military defenses. Just like the guys who built the Tower of Babel, they thought their own hands could build a wall high enough to keep them safe. But guess what? No wall you can build is a match for God's judgment.
But Isaiah's not done yet. He includes a very specific and really fascinating symbol in verse 16, the ships of Tarshish. Now, on the surface, this just seems like it's about trade and economic power, but it actually carries a much deeper, more personal warning.
See, whenever you hear Tarshish, your mind should immediately go to the prophet Jonah. Remember that story? God tells him to go to Nineveh, but instead, Jonah hops on a ship to Tarshish, which was literally the farthest known point in the opposite direction, all to run away from God. So the ships of Tarshish become this powerful symbol for the idea that you cannot escape. You can try to hide behind your walls, or you can try to run to the ends of the earth. It doesn't matter. God's judgment is inescapable.
The very last symbol in verse 16 is pleasant pictures. This basically refers to all their luxury items, their fancy art, their sculptures, their treasures. It's a direct shot at their pride in being rich. And it perfectly mirrors that story of King Hezekiah, who foolishly showed off his entire treasury to some visitors from Babylon. And what did Isaiah tell him? He prophesied that every single one of those pleasant pictures would one day be hauled off to Babylon.
So let's bring this all the way back to verse 10. When judgment finally comes and every single symbol of human pride is shattered, your leaders, your army, your money, your escape plan, what is left? Absolutely nothing. The only thing left for people to do is to try and hide in the rocks and the dust, terrified by the sheer glory and majesty of the Lord.
And that leaves us with this final, unavoidable question. Isaiah's prophecy just systematically tears down every false refuge we try to build for ourselves. It forces every single one of us to ask, if nothing that we can create or achieve can ultimately save us, then where in the world can true, lasting security ever be found?